Sorry, I got a phone call and apparently that stops videos. What I was saying is that doesn't mean that we can throw the baby out with the bathwater and thus say that, no scientist should be listened to, or that there are no experts and that anybody's opinion is as good as the next one. So I'll leave that alone there. And then finally, before I answer some of their questions specifically and quickly, hopefully, there's this when we talk about like being wrong, there's a fear of being wrong. And that fear of being wrong has been around for a long time, but probably, I don't know if it's fair to say. Let's just say that in this current age, it is exceptionally difficult to work with people who who struggle with this fear. And the reason is that we live in a time where everybody's stuff is public information, or rather whenever they say something or do something, they tweet something from 2004 and they don't get a job because of it. In the past these things would have been forgotten, people wouldn't have known about them, but because of technology, and quick plug for my class, Culture, Media, and Society, which hopefully runs next semester if you're interested in taking it. But there's been a change here that's happened to where people's faults are more in the public eye. And so people fear it more than they ever have. And that is problematic for learning, because people who really want to learn have to be wrong often, because of the fact that they just aren't naturally going to understand and know the truth. They're going to have thoughts and they're going to have opinions, and those opinions and thoughts could be wrong, which will actually be helpful for them learning the truth later on. But it's not actually happening because people are afraid of being wrong, and thus they don't say what they think, and then we don't have public discourse. So whenever a student does have some sort of thought or attitude that says, yeah, I am actually prejudiced towards this people group, but I wouldn't want to say that because everybody would just jump all over me. And they're right. People would jump all over them, but then they can't change what they think because they're not able to say what it is that they think and put it out there and have other people objectively and carefully and cautiously work through that assumption with them and change their mind on it. We live in a time of outrage culture, which is again, something for another class. But outrage culture is prevalent right now, and we're outraged about everything and anything. One of my favorite things to do as I scroll through Facebook is to pick any innocuous video that I can find, and then sure enough, I just have to, usually one or two comments down, somebody's upset about it. Somebody's upset about that this video of this cat playing with a dog or something like that, and people are just outraged about it. So people become afraid of being wrong. One of the reasons, the phenomenon why somebody like Donald Trump can get voted in the office is because there is a huge, huge group of Americans who don't want to have to live with this fear of being wrong. And here's this guy who's wrong all the time. We won't admit it. He's wrong all the time, and yet he's willing to just say whatever it is that he thinks. And in that way, he's an example to that group in society. Regarding politics, by the way, just so that you guys are, on the same page as me, I'm pretty apolitical. When I say that, I mean, I don't understand how a thinking adult could completely side with either Republican or Democrat. I think it would be extremely difficult for me to just be like, oh yeah, I completely agree with this one political party's stance on everything for the most part. But people do that, which shows, in my mind, a lack of thought and probably them subscribing to the very thing that we were talking about in the last video. And so I don't, if you're wondering, whether I'm, a part of the liberal media or I'm, a conservative, closet conservative or something like that, wonder no longer. I think both sides have some things that are dramatically wrong about their viewpoints and some things that are also pretty right about viewpoints. And again, I would just kind of say here, that there's a quote by Mark Twain, who's one of my favorite writers in history. And Mark Twain said, if you ever find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reconsider. And when you have these two massive groups that are at odds with each other on a bunch of different things, you have to ask yourself the question, how could it be that one group is fully right? And yet, a big chunk of Americans believe that their group is pretty much right about most things, which is problematic to a free thinker. And so if you're one of those people, I would suggest that you do some thinking, okay? Pause and reconsider. But that being said, Anam had a good thought or question about, or a thought rather, on objectivity being subjective, and how can we ever be fully objective if we, are subjective by nature? And the answer is pretty simple. Yes, we are subjective by nature. Not everybody should receive the same level of credibility in what they're saying, from what I was saying earlier. But we also then don't throw objectivity out with the bathwater. There are some things that you can say and that you can think that are categorically wrong. For instance, whenever Hitler thought, it's really the Jews' fault that all this is going on in our society, and so we should exterminate them, we can say that that's wrong. One problem with relativism is especially something like ethical relativism, which basically says nothing can really be right or wrong morally or ethically, which is a problem. Okay, I have deep issues with that being a real thing. Tuba's question. Let me go over here. Tuba said, and I think I'm saying y'all's names right. If I'm not, just correct me. I'll do my very best to say your names right. Whenever I introduce myself, people always call me Gary, which isn't right, and I usually don't correct them. So Tuba says, what do we do with ideas and concepts which have no objective data to back them up? Well, you either look for objective data and you become a scientist who can create some objective data about that phenomenon, which is actually one of the main reasons that I got into sociology in the first place. And the idea would then be that if you were interested in that field, like sociology, which we're always looking for more sociology majors. If you're interested, it's a very lucrative degree. And so, you look for a social phenomenon and you say, why does this happen? And then you can study it. So if you want to know why, we could go from a president like President Barack Obama, the first black president in history, to, Donald Trump, then you have to understand society. There's some key things that are at play here. And you'd have to go back and actually look at, some real data. But then also, if the ideas and data can't have objective data, so there's some metaphysical assertions that people make around religion and things like that. If they don't have objective data to back them up, then you must leave the jury out, so to speak. If you don't have the data, you can't make a ruling per se. And that depends a lot on your worldview, though, too. That's only in regards to the natural sciences that we think these kinds of things. So my suggestion is that perhaps some different rules apply to metaphysical understanding. That's probably a little bit too far along the lines of a different class, but it is something that I would think about anyway. Fi asked the question, why do people have so much trouble admitting when they are obviously in the wrong? See the above. Fear of people's reactions. Also, we just think really highly of ourselves, and that's a problem as well. If you don't know that you're wrong about something, or can't consider being wrong about stuff, I don't understand why people can't be wrong and be happy about it. So, for instance, if you're like, hey, this thing that you said was true, you said 50% of people blah blah, I went and looked it up and it's actually 40%, I'd be like, wow, that's really helpful, thank you, that now I won't be saying the wrong thing anymore. And I don't know why that person would think less of me for having that response. Oftentimes we think people will think less of us for having a wrong, or for being wrong about something. But people really think less of us when we're wrong about stuff and don't admit it than they do if we're wrong and we do admit it. You get more credit there. So interesting understanding there too. Serena's question is, can an individual ever be fully right or wrong in their beliefs? I believe an individual probably could be fully wrong in their beliefs, depending on who it was. I doubt that it's super possible, but it could be. But can an individual ever be fully right in their beliefs? The answer, I think, is probably no there. But again, just because the answer is no doesn't mean there isn't gradations of right and wrong, and that we shouldn't try to still be right. It would be like me going on to a desert island and there's not, a lot of food to eat. So I'm like, I'm just going to not eat food at all. Well, you're just going to die sooner than the person who at least tries to scavenge or scrounge around for food. So that'd be something to consider there too. And then Martin asked a question, which I thought was a good, honest question. Why is it that conservatives are viewed as people who are against progress and equality? The book seems to have that disposition. It's been a while since I've read the book. In general, I like to let Macionis be his own professor of sociology, and then I'll be my professor, and you guys can weigh our input data, accordingly. But I will say this: there is on both sides of this, like I said, conservative and liberal, a real problem of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is where we only pay attention to the things that would affirm our existing thoughts and attitudes on certain things. Historically, yes, liberal has been associated with more progressive ideas. Some of those progressive ideas have been excellent and shaped society in the right direction because conservatives would have preferred to keep it the way it was. But then there are plenty of things that have been progressive in the past that have led us astray in a lot of different areas in society. So I'll just say we have to think critically about all of these different things. We have to think critically about the realities that we actually look at. And I want to encourage you once again, big plug here. Please, please, please consider your sources carefully. Okay, one of the main ways that you learn how to think well, besides asking questions, is also to consider your sources very, very carefully. Who is it that's telling me this thing? Why is it that I should listen to them and trust their advice? You should ask the same question about me. Why is it that I should listen to them and trust their thoughts and attitudes about things? And then finally, how much weight should I give their expression of what's going on? Because that will change things. So if I tell you something about sociology or about society, I want you to go and look it up and feel free to do so. If you're and then to think of it as something that you should probably pay attention to as a professor of sociology. But if your parents tell you something about society, unless your parent studies society for a living like I do, then most likely your response should be to say, that's interesting. I'm going to have to do some more research on that. One of my favorite Facebook comments that I see regularly is the joke Facebook comment that says, I'm not an expert, but blah, 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 blah. So I'm not going to say anything because, like I said, I'm not an expert, which is such a beautiful, funny joke, but also something that we should learn too. It's, I'm not an expert on this, and so I'm going to shut up and actually not have an opinion to spout off at any given point. Rather, I'm going to say, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm going to do some research and be quiet until I feel like I have some actual data that is diverse enough and that is complete enough to actually express an opinion on something. I would highly suggest that to you, especially if you want to not be wrong as much, which some of you are very keen on doing. Okay, I'm going to sign off from here. It's been too long already. I hope you guys have a great week. I'll talk to you soon.